Hey, how's it going everyone? Zach D Productions here, and I am here with two guests for this video. So for this video, we've got the TheItalianStallion51, aka Fabio, and also TotalMeltdown2, aka Minotaur. So for this video, the three of us are going to go over 5 albums from the 1980s that we think are underrated. So 5 albums for each of us. I'm going to go ahead and go first, so let's go ahead and get started. And this list is in no particular order either, so keep that in mind. So I think the first album I'll get into here is from Aerosmith, definitely a legendary rock band. So the album that I chose from Aerosmith is Done with Mirrors. And definitely one of their most underrated albums, I would say. Definitely a classic. There's many great songs on this one, like, of course, Let the Music Do the Talkin', My Fist Your Face, and Sheila, of course. And I would say that this album has some of their heaviest work as well, especially My Fist Your Face, maybe one of the heaviest Aerosmith tracks that there is. Overall, very strong album with some very solid instrumentation and everything, just very solid vocal work from Steven Tyler, just all kind of Aerosmith goodness to this album. I mean, definitely a good one, and one that I would say is underrated for sure. So, Done with Mirrors from Aerosmith. So the next album we have up is from Rush. Now, when it comes to the 80s era of Rush, it's something that I know that some fans love, some fans hate. You know, I know that a lot of Rush fans prefer their 70s progressive music, more progressive-leaning music. But for me, I like all eras of Rush. I think they all have something great to offer, even during this time in the 80s. Now, this album in particular, I find extremely underrated, and from some Rush rankings that I've seen from some YouTubers, some people have this extremely low in their lists, in their ranking, but I do not agree with that at all, because I think that this is a very strong album. And so the album that I chose from Rush is Power Windows, which I know is a very synth-driven album. It's very atmospheric, especially when you listen to songs like Mystic Rhythms, which is the closing track, and I really dig that song. It's maybe one of my favorite closing tracks from Rush. There's other great tracks on the album, of course, like the opening track, The Big Money, which is probably the one that people know the most on this album, along with Marathon. Seems to be another fan favorite. You also have Manhattan Project, Emotion Detector, pretty underrated deep cut from Rush, I would say. So all in all, just a very strong Rush album, I would say. And yes, it is more synth-driven, very much on the atmospheric side of things, but I dig this album. And if you didn't like it at first, give it another chance. It's definitely worth a listen. So this is an album that I knew I wanted to be on this list. So Power Windows by Rush. All right, so next we have an album from Yes. Now, like with Rush, I know there's a lot of fans of Yes that are very dismissive towards the 80s era of Yes, due to the same reasons, because, oh, they added more synths into their music, and, you know, they sound more commercial, more radio friendly, or what have you, whatever the complaint is that people want to make when it comes to this particular era, when a lot of these prog rock bands got to the 80s, they put out music like this. So the album that I chose from Yes is their album Drama. Definitely a strong album, I would say. And overall, I would say that this is a good mix of both sides of Yes. At least I would say so. I mean, you have some proggy stuff on here, some more complex stuff, along with that synth-driven stuff. I think that this is a good bridge between both those styles of Yes. Just very good stuff, and very good songwriting too. I mean, some very good stuff on here. You have Machine Messiah, which is a really strong opening track. You have Does It Really Happen? Into the Lens, also pretty good. You have Run Through the Light, and Tempest Fugit, which is maybe one of my all-time favorite Yes songs. But all in all, just a really good album, and one that I do think is pretty underrated. So this album had to make the list. Drama from Yes. Okay, so this next album up, now you could make the argument about whether or not this album is truly underrated, but I would say that most of this band's material is underrated. Honestly, there's only one album in this band's entire discography that I would say is not underrated. And the band I'm talking about is Asia, of course, and the album that I chose from Asia is their album Alpha. And when it comes to their 80s work, I would say that this is the most underrated one. Now, again, you could make the argument, is this album really underrated? Because I've had some people tell me that, oh, Asia's not underrated because, you know, they have their hits and everything. But honestly, besides Heat of the Moment, what other song from Asia do you ever hear on the radio? I think when it comes to fans of Asia and how they would rank the albums, yes, this would probably rank pretty high for a lot of people. But even in saying that, I still think the album is pretty underrated and not talked about enough. I mean, you do have, of course, some fan favorites on here, like Don't Cry, The Smile Has Left Your Eyes, and Open Your Eyes, which are really good songs. And this album does have some pretty underrated deep cuts too, like My Own Time, I'll Do What I Want. That's a really great song, probably one of my favorite deep cuts from Asia. I really love the melody of that song and just how catchy it is and everything. Overall, Alpha, pretty good album from Asia. I do dig this one. It definitely doesn't get the attention that it deserves, in my opinion. I know it's not as big as their debut, which is probably the only Asia album that I would say is not underrated, because, you know, even if you're not a fan of Asia, that album does have its fans. I know that there's some people that are not fans of Asia that do actually dig that album. So, but when it comes to their second album, Alpha, really good one. This one deserves almost as much recognition as their debut, in my opinion. So, really good album. Okay, so the last album for my list is from Black Sabbath, and this is from the Tony Martin era of Black Sabbath, The Eternal Idol, which is probably my second favorite of the Tony Martin stuff. Just a very strong album, I would say. I mean, The Shining, I think, is one of the best Black Sabbath songs of the Tony Martin era. He's got some great vocal deliveries on this album just throughout. Just all in all, a very strong album. And again, probably my second favorite of the Tony Martin stuff in Black Sabbath. My top favorite would be, of course, Headless Cross. So there's that. But all in all, The Eternal Idol, very strong album from Black Sabbath. So that is my list of underrated albums from the 80s. So next, we'll be moving on to the TheItalianStallion51, aka Fabio, and then on to TotalMeltdown2, aka Minotaur. But that was my list. Let me know what you think of my choices for underrated albums that came out in the 80s. So on that note, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And definitely go subscribe to the TheItalianStallion51 and TotalMeltdown2. Definitely very cool guys. So that's my list. Thanks for watching. Now on to the next person.
Hello everybody, my name is Fabio, aka the TheItalianStallion51 here on YouTube, and I was asked by my friend Zach D Productions to contribute to this video that you are watching right now about 5 albums from the 1980s that are underrated. And of course I said yes, I would love to participate in this video. The problem is picking 5 albums that I feel are underrated, because there are quite a few, particularly from the 1980s, that I feel are underrated. So I did narrow down 5 random albums. Most of them are hard rock. One is hard rock, but it leans a little more southern rock, so to speak. But I figured wanted to give this album a little bit of attention. Wanted to give all these albums with an S. It's plural, not singular. My bad. Wanted to give all of these albums a little bit of attention. So here we are. I hope you guys enjoy this, and maybe you will go check these albums out if you have not already. So first up, have to include this. A gentleman that recently passed away a few months ago. One of a guitar player that, well, yeah, in more recent years I have really come to appreciate his work and really get into it and realize just how great he was. And unfortunately we did lose John Sykes. And everyone thinks of the other album that he did with this particular band, but this one, you know, this one needs a little bit more love. This one needs a little bit more attention, and The first album I'm talking about here is Whitesnake's Slide It In. This was the first album that John Sykes played on. This is actually the American mix because the European version did not include John Sykes. The American version did. When Geffen Records, that's who it was, when they bought the rights to this album, they liked everything they heard except the guitars. They wanted a bigger guitar sound, and John Sykes came in, re-recorded all the guitar tracks, and here we are. But I absolutely love this album. Guilty of Love is definitely a song that you need to check out. It was actually, ironically, it was on in the car today, I think on my way to where I was going, and I was like, sweet. And it was the first song that played when I got in, so that must have been a sign. But John Sykes, an amazing player. He was also, his entire body of work is underrated, but for the sake of one album that I had in my collection, because I did want to include albums that I have physically just for a better visual experience, gotta go with Slide It In from Whitesnake. And you also have the amazing and the sorely missed Cozy Powell on drums, Neil Murray on bass, and John Lord, who was also unfortunately gone, on keyboards from Deep Purple. But the title track is awesome. Slow and Easy, Love Ain't No Stranger, Gambler, Standing in the Shadow. The entire album is fantastic. But if I had to pick one song from this album, and I will do that with each of the albums, by the way, not just this one, but if I had to pick one song for you guys to go check out, for you guys to go listen to, my choice is Guilty of Love, which is just a killer song. So there you go, kicking it off with Whitesnake, paying a little tribute to John Sykes. You can't go wrong. Next up, a band that I think has quite a few underrated albums, but if we're speaking strictly of the 80s, I could lean towards two of the other albums that they did in the 80s, but I got to go with this one because I think that this is the most underrated album they did in that decade. And I'm talking about AC/DC with Blow Up Your Video. First of all, you want to talk about amazing album covers. Look at this one. You've got Angus flying out of a television. I mean, does it really get any more hard rock or heavy metal or whatever you want to call it than this? I don't think so. I mean, this is, for the admission price alone, this is what we're working with. But AC/DC, in the midst of the 80s, when everybody was trying something different, when everybody was playing with synthesizers and trying to get the pop, fresh, clean look and sound for their bands, AC/DC was one of the few bands that did not do that. They have never done that in their career. But I got to go with this one because this actually has one of my all-time favorite, Brian Johnson. I'll put that out there because you're talking about AC/DC, you got to talk about Bon Scott. One of my favorite Brian Johnson AC/DC songs, definitely in my top 10 favorite, Heat Seeker. Heat Seeker is a killer song even today. But the rest of the album is great. That's the Way I Want to Rock and Roll, Mean Streak, Go Zone, Kissin' Dynamite, Rough Stuff is a great one, This Means War, and of course the other tracks. But if I had to pick one, it would be Heat Seeker. I've just always thought that that was a kick-ass, killer rock song. AC/DC at their best, and at a time when nobody was really talking about them, nobody was really paying attention to them. They didn't get glammed out. They didn't wear wigs. I mean, yes, they all had long hair, but they've always had long hair. They're AC/DC. But they didn't try to clean up their sound or anything. They were one of the few hard rock bands, metal bands, whatever you want. I mean, they're not really metal, but they have influenced metal, as you all very well know. But they were one of the few that never compromised, never played games, always just gave you straight up kick-ass rock and roll. And my pick has to go with this. Killer album. If you have not spun this one in a while, or even maybe you've never even heard of the stuff on this record, go give this a look. And I was going to pick Fly on the Wall, but I kind of think this one's more underrated. For Those About to Rock, not For Those About to Rock, I'm sorry. I was either going to pick Flick of the Switch or Fly on the Wall. My bad, because they're both underrated as well. But this one, I'm leaning towards more of this one. Those albums are great as well. Even Who Made Who, which is kind of a compilation with a new song on there. That's actually one of my all-time favorite Brian Johnson songs as well. But I don't know. It's just something about this album that really just sticks out. And it's like, if I got to pick one from the 80s era of AC/DC, that, you know, if someone was like, other than Black and Black, Zucker and Succotash, but other than Back in Black, let's try that again. And for those about to rock, what would you recommend? Go with this one. Start with this one, then kind of work backwards. You will not be disappointed. I assure you of that. We will save that. Well, we'll save those two for last because they are in conjunction, so it's like a cheat. But next up, this one is not... It's rock, but it's not hard rock. It's not heavy metal. It's more southern rock. But a guitar player... Actually, correction. Two guitar players that are very near and dear to me, who I've always loved. Unfortunately, we did lose Dickie Betts last year. And if we're talking underrated 80s albums, I have to put this one on there. Pattern Disruptive, which was released under the Dickie Betts band. All of the stuff that he did outside of the Allman Brothers, I kind of put in one category. That's just how I do it. I'm sure other people do it different. But this is a great rock album. You know how I found out about this album? You know how I found out about these songs? Actually through a bootleg. I found a live radio performance when the band was touring behind this album, and immediately tried to track this album down and listen to it. I had it on CD. I upgraded to the vinyl. And this is just great rock. Yeah, it's a little overproduced. I will say that because it was the 80s, but there's just some great songs on here. And we are introduced to none other than Mr. Warren Haynes, who would later play with Dickie in the Allman Brothers and has done a million different things in music. Not only is he one of my favorite musicians, he's one of my favorite human beings as well. And then you have Johnny Neal, who we lost Johnny last year as well. He played keyboards and pianos. He did a little bit of time in the Allman Brothers. And I didn't know this, but Johnny was blind. Imagine that. Another blind piano player, other than Ray Charles, that nobody talks about. But Johnny was a great, and he sings on this record, but Johnny was a great singer, great piano player. Again, unfortunately, we lost him as well, I believe, last year. And Matt Apps, who would later play, who still plays with Warren Haynes in Government Mule, which is a killer band. For those of you that have never heard of them, check those guys out. They can play everything. And then you got Marty Prevette on bass, who kind of a journeyman musician. But killer album. And this is a gold stamp promo copy, which doesn't really mean anything, but I do like finding these. These are pretty cool. But I picked this up for $10 at a record show. You can't go wrong. But so many killer songs on here. Rock Bottom is a great, just straight up rock song. Great way to open the album. Time to Roll is good. The Blues Ain't Nothing, but a Good Man Feeling Bad, which is true. Heartbreak Line. Under the Guns of Love is cool. Far Cry, Lover Man. But if I had to pick one, it would be the instrumental song Dwayne's Tune, which was written as a tribute to not only Dwayne Allman, but also Dickie Betts' son, who shares the same name. And there is nothing better than a Dickie Betts instrumental, whether it's Jessica or In Memory of Elizabeth Reed, or the ones that never get talked about like High Falls or Pegasus, or this one, Dwayne's Tune. That would be my pick off of this record. So there you go. And the last two that I'm going to talk about, they do work in conjunction with one another. I mean, honestly, I could have thrown in an honorable mention, but, you know, now I second guess. No, you know what? No. I made the right choice. First up, not with this one, with the next one. But this was tough. This was really tough to pick 5, so my bad. But with this, I have to include this one. The guy did 3 albums in the 80s. All of them are underrated, but this is the most underrated. We got the Joe Perry Project after he left Aerosmith. Let the Music Do the Talking. Again, just the album cover alone is classic, but this is just straight up kick-ass rock and roll. Can you imagine if this was an Aerosmith album? Imagine if it was just them and not Joe Perry. But God had different plans, and that's okay because I love Joe Perry's solo stuff. Never gets talked about. He's done some great albums. Check out his self-titled album, and the last one he did, Switzerland Manifesto. That's really good too. But since we're talking the '80s, I got to go with this one. There's just so many killer rock songs. The title track, which Aerosmith re-recorded, I like both versions, but I kind of like Joe Perry's version a little bit more. Conflict of Interest, Discount Dog, Shooting Star, Break Song, The Mist is Rising, all great stuff. But if I had to pick one, Rockin' Train. And I did get to see, a couple years ago, Joe Perry went out on tour with this, and he had Gary Cherone from Extreme on vocals, and that was a killer show. And to hear Gary Cherone, who is as big as an Aerosmith fan as probably bigger than me because he's from Boston, on stage with Joe Perry, kicking ass, singing Rockin' Train. Can you really get mad at that? No. Great stuff. I could have picked any of the Joe Perry Project albums from the 80s, but this was always the best one in my opinion. This was always my favorite, and all three of them are underrated. Now, last, I probably should have included the previous album, but in conjunction with that, I do have Aerosmith Done with Mirrors, because this album never gets brought up. And speaking of Let the Music Do the Talking, this is the album where Aerosmith covered that. Now, it's coincidentally called Done with Mirrors. They were still on drugs at the time, by the way. But this was supposed to be the comeback, and it didn't happen until 2 years later. But this is a killer record. This is an awesome record, and I love that you have to hold it up to a mirror to see it correctly. I love that they did that. The CD version, I don't think did that, but the vinyl did. So even better to have the vinyl. And then the back is the same way. And then you have to flip it to see the album, the track listing, which is cool. But the Let the Music Do the Talking, I love their version. My Fist Your Face is a killer song. Sheila's good. Gypsy Boots. But my favorite is She's on Fire. If you've never heard that song, you got to do yourself a favor and check it out. Honorable mention would be Rockin' a Hard Place, which is the only Aerosmith album that Joe Perry and I think Brad Whitford plays on it, but not much. Joe Perry doesn't play on that album, but that album is killer. That would be the honorable mention, because that had Lightning Strikes, which should have been a huge song. But I don't know. I do have a little bit of a soft spot for this, because it's just, I remember buying the CD at a gas station when I was in the Army, and I was like, cool, and I just played it, and I like, why was this not like the comeback? Why was this not the beginning, like the true beginning of the comeback for Aerosmith? Because when you hear about Aerosmith, nobody ever talks about this record. Nobody ever brings this one up. It's always Permanent Vacation, which is good. I do like that record, but I like this one more because it's still raw. It's still visceral. Ted Templeman produced it, who worked with Van Halen, so there you go. But all good stuff here. Like I said, it was very difficult to pick 5. I cannot wait, because I don't know the 5 that Zach picked, and there's another person involved in this video. I can't wait to see what their picks were, and I can't wait to read your guys' comments and see what your picks are. So, not Pixar that made Toy Story, but your picks. But anyway, I appreciate the invite here, and hopefully this is not the only one that I will be asked to do. And once again, I look forward to everybody's choices for the records, whether it's the people involved in the video or all of you down below in the comments section. And we'll talk. I don't know why I'm not from New York, despite what people may think, but I just said talk like a New Yorker, so I'm sorry. These guys are from New York. Aerosmith's from New York, so there you go. My bad. But anyway, we will talk. That's the word. We will talk to you all soon, and we'll see you out there on YouTube. Bye-bye.
Hey, TotalMeltdown2 here, and I want to thank Zach D Productions and for putting this collab together. Also want to thank Fabio for being part of it, TheItalianStallion51. Zach and Fabio are great guys. I've known them for a while. And so let's get started on the list. So it's top 5 underrated 80s albums. So number one for me would be The Ultimate Sin by Ozzy Osbourne. So Ultimate Sin was the second album that featured Jakey Lee on guitar. And Jakey Lee, for me, is a huge influence. He's a monster guitar player, very inventive on the guitar. And Ultimate Sin is one of those albums that kind of gets a little bit of hate. And, while you could argue it's not as good as Bark at the Moon, I still think it's up there. There's a lot of great songs on there, like Secret Loser and Shot in the Dark, Ultimate Sin, Never Know Why. And Jake's playing is amazing as always. He's will always be my favorite Ozzy guitar player. Number two would be Don't Break the Oath by Merciful Fate. Merciful Fate is another underrated band, had a huge influence on Metallica and Megadeth. They really don't get talked about much, maybe outside of their first album. Their second album, Don't Break the Oath, is just an amazing metal album. If you just love classic heavy metal, then you're gonna love that album, Don't Break the Oath by Merciful Fate. I mean, it's just one riff after another, after another, after another. King Diamond's vocals can be a bit of an acquired taste, but I was, I didn't care for them at first, but I got used to his high falsetto voice. Highlights on the album are like, Nightmare, Desecration of Souls, Dangerous Meeting, and I think The Oath is a masterpiece, even though I'm not really fond of the satanic lyrics on that, but great album, great band, Merciful Fate, very underrated. Third would be Riot, Fire Down Under. Fire Down Under is probably their most well-known album, but not a lot of people even know about the band Riot. So I wanted to put that on there. Fire Down Under is just a great, heavy, hard rock album, ahead of its time, really, and, it doesn't really get mentioned very much. Number four, Killing Is My Business, and Business Is Good by Megadeth. You could argue that it's not really underrated by Megadeth fan standards, but you really don't, if you think about it, you really don't hear Killing Is My Business brought up very much. The songs on there like Looking Down the Cross, Mechanics, Last Rites, Love to Death. So you don't really hear those songs brought up very much, and it's a fast and furious album. This is when Dave just had a lot of fire in him. He's really angry at Metallica. It's just an insane album. I've grown to appreciate it a lot more through the years, and it's probably the most underrated album from the 80s. And the fifth one would be, my last pick is Blue Murder, the album by the band Blue Murder. And Blue Murder is a sort of a super group formed by John Sykes after he got kicked out of not Metallica, Whitesnake. And this is a really solid album. I've only just discovered it, but John Sykes is an incredible guitar player. He was the total package. I know he passed away recently. Rest in peace. He had the looks. He had the voice, the guitar playing style, like the Les Paul. He had everything. And this album really shows that. You got bluesy, groovy sort of songs, with also a little bit of, you got those 80s keyboards in there that really, it just sounds very 80s, this album does. And so if you love 80s hard rock, I think you'll really like it. There's some ballads on there, there's some groovy, mid-paced songs on there. There's, it's a great underrated album. No one really talks about it, so that is my top 5 underrated 80s albums. And I will see you later. Total Meltdown 2.